Welcome back to the show, everybody. Well, check it out. It is the Freedom Zone. Go to digperspectives.com and join the Freedom Zone right here. And catch this. We are going to get together with Digital Asset Investor with a live stream inside the Freedom Zone this week. You can catch it too for less than the cost of a cup of coffee per month. You can join the Freedom Zone and get exclusive content like that. Make sure you click the button and get inside of there. That is happening this week. Now I want to tell you about this. It's Miles Franklin, ladies and gentlemen, and we got him coming on. It's Andy Schectman himself talking about what's going on, the geopolitical events. Let's get to that interview, but before we do, click the link for Miles Franklin below. It's actually an email, info@Miles Franklin, and put Dig Gold in the subject box. Now let's get to this incredible conversation. Shout out to Andy. Andy, how are you?
I'm doing good, brother. It's good to see you. Crazy world we live in all of a sudden, but Brad, it's always good to be back. Thanks for having me.
We love having you back, and the audience loves you, and I do too, man. And I tell you, it is a crazy world we're living in, and let's talk about that. Where do you want to start with this, Andy?
Oh, geez. I mean, there's a million places to start. I'll follow your lead, but I mean, I'm sure everyone wants to talk about the conflicts that are going on around the world, and that's fair. I think that certainly there's a lot to focus on there. And, maybe I'll just take this and run with it just for a moment. I think the lack of unity in this country is startling to me, whether it be on economic things, whether it be socially, morally, or things like what's happening in the Middle East. This is not about religion to me as much as it is about the fact that, Israel is the one democratic nation in the Middle East that is very, very, very important to the United States interests. And one of these things that I think the saying, you don't realize how important something is until it's no longer there, till it's gone, becomes relevant to me in terms of how this could spiral and what it could mean. I mean, look, you have, I think, a very good chance of this spiraling into certainly a regional war that could very quickly drag the United States, and God forbid it doesn't escalate into a World War III. But, let's realize that you have the majority of the oil in the Middle East that is controlled by the Straits of Hormuz and by the nations that are involved in this. You could very quickly see this spiral into a situation where you see an OPEC style oil embargo, or maybe it's just that moment where the countries who have been pushing back against the West and their hegemony, those that have joined BRICS recently, like Iran, like Saudi Arabia, like the United Arab Emirates, you have these countries that could say, look, we've been thinking for a long time that our paths are divergent. And it's even becoming more apparent that they are diverging greater. We have joined the BRICS nations. We have joined, this would be Saudi Arabia and OPEC, all of our brothers and sisters on the Belt Road Initiative. We have joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, along with Iran. In the span of 1 year, Iran has joined the BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is the largest regional financial and military organization on the planet. Now, this could spiral in a way that I don't think people would be very happy with its outcome. Let's hope to God it doesn't come into something crazy like that. But at the very least, I think what we could witness would be much, much higher oil prices. Oil touches everything we do, from this podcast, surfing the internet. Knock it off every damn time. Every time I do a podcast, someone knocks on our door and my dog.
I love it. Look, that's life happening.
Yep, I apologize.
You're all right.
In any case, all right, sorry about that. The UPS guy always seems to come every single time I start a podcast. Someone decides to knock on the door, and my dogs are they're little twerps, but they're good guard dogs because they certainly alert you to what's going on. Anyways, look, I think that at the very least, we could see adverse spillovers to the global markets. And I think we will see that. I think you could see the price of oil really skyrocket. And as I was saying before the UPS guy got here, that look, everything we touch is a byproduct of oil, from surfing the internet to mining to farming to anything, driving, you name it. Energy costs are at the root of it. You see higher energy costs, which I believe we will see. You're going to see higher inflation, which I believe we will see. And I think you'll see the central banks of the world continue to do what they're doing to combat inflation, which would be to continue to raise interest rates. I think interest rates will go much higher, but I don't think they'll go as high as they ultimately will when the world dumps the dollar for sole settlement currency for petrol. The petrodollar status that we have and been clinging to for 50 years by protecting the Saudi kingdom is something that's disappearing rapidly. And this could be the event that would usher in, I think, a much more accelerated decision by the OPEC countries to move to a different settlement system. Now we're seeing this little by little by little by little, a term called logarithmic decay, where all of these countries are settling in their local currencies for energy and for other things. But it would be an event like this that would rally the Arab nations against the West, against Israel, to where we could see them very quickly just dump the dollar for the settlement currency for oil. And that's the moment, that's that Klaus Schwab moment that I'm very concerned about, where every country on the planet, Brad, for 50 years has had to stockpile dollars in order to buy oil. And if everyone simultaneously no longer had that necessity because OPEC says, listen, we're going a different direction. You guys have signed an executive order to go green. We respect that. That's your prerogative. We have partnered with 90% of the world, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the BRICS, the Belt Road Initiative, the Eurasian Economic Union, 90% of human population who's not going green. And you know what? They also look at the world in a similar way that we do. Now, again, I'm extrapolating here, but where could this go? This is a whole hell of a lot further than I think people understand. And we end up losing the settlement currency for oil. Every country on the planet will dump dollars. And as that happens, that tsunami of inflation hits our shores, creating a massive surge of inflation. And the byproduct of that is interest rates that have to spike to compensate for the loss of purchasing power. That's the moment that becomes a religious experience for people in this country, as everything that makes people feel wealthy, stocks, bonds, real estate, 401ks, you name it, is inversely correlated to that massive spike in interest rates. One that the Federal Reserve definitely does not have the courage, a la Paul Volcker, to raise rates to a level that would do this. I think the market will indeed do this. And this could be the moment that I've been talking about for 3 years now, albeit I didn't see this moment coming in this way. But that's always the way that it plays out in economics. You may have a theory rooted in mathematics, economics, with a sprinkling of old school logic, but we don't know, who would have ever thunk that 2020 would have been what it was, that we would all be locked down in the midst of a pandemic. The point of it is that there's always something you don't see coming that could very quickly bring on the premise that I have been talking about, which is rooted in mathematics, logic, and economics. So I guess we'll see, but this is a very big deal. It's not just protecting the country that we promised to protect. It's not just the horrible atrocities of war. It's a whole lot bigger than that. And really, I think ultimately boils down to a once in a generation change, ultimately, for world reserve status and the way that the rest of the world looks at the West.
Well, Andy, there's so much to unpack there. I want to start with oil, petrodollar agreement, oil. It's so important to understand the connection of what's going on with these conflicts around the world that you pointed out when you started talking. And look, Russia, huge natural gas resources, right? We know that there are Iran, huge oil producer. As you said, join BRICS, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates. 80% of the world's oil production will be living inside of BRICS next to Russia and China. To go to that point of strength, to understand what that really means, the unwinding of a petrodollar agreement. This is where I believe how you and I even met here is about this crossroads that I believe is coming with the digital age and distributed ledger technology, XRP ledger, and other essential ledgers that are immutable, right? That can absolutely keep people honest, right? And countries honest, more importantly. But if done right, I believe, and I try, and this is something that is a working theory. And as you said, I really like the way you had said it too, about you could have theories about how certain things come about, but it's always the way events unfold. You never quite see that black swan event or whatever that particular piece is, that final piece that throws everything into motion. You can never really know what that'll be. But broadly, what I see is the threat of the unwinding of the petrodollar agreement happening. And the United States cannot afford to stand back and watch that moment, as you have pointed out, which would be hyperinflation to a religious order of understanding, wouldn't it? And, you know, when I think about that, then I think about, okay, what is the next thing that the United States could do and use to underpin the United States dollar to continue its role as a global reserve currency? And what could they do in that regard that they don't have to rely on oil producing countries to honor that agreement? Because that's what they're tired of doing, right? They're tired of helping to elevate the power of the dollar to give the United States the strong arm over the world. So I see the opportunity here for the United States to adopt a set of value protocols like the XRP ledger, represent reserves on that ledger, like gold, baby, physical gold on that ledger, and other major assets as well that are spread out. So it's not backed by one thing, because we know that the Fed didn't enjoy being handcuffed to the gold standard, right? So if we broaden those assets to gold, silver, copper, platinum, and oil and other reserves of the world, real estate even, you could really broaden that spectrum of what now underpins the new US dollar. And you could make sure if the design, and this is a very careful moment, I want to be careful here, if the design characteristics of a digital dollar are such that it doesn't violate the constitutional rights of a citizen holding it, and that goes for a citizen of the globe even, then you could see them backing and repatriating to a digital dollar and telling everybody, listen, because this is the way to look, this is the way to move the debt, by introducing a new set of bonds to a new digital dollar. And then you can repatriate the euro dollar market and everything to go with it and express that on a value protocol like the XRP ledger. Then we're starting to move over to the new system in a way that almost like filling one bucket to another bucket, and being able to ensure that there's a transition taking place that begins to let the power out of the sails of the oil producing countries that think they have us over a barrel right now, which they do, and it's hanging over an oil barrel. Your thoughts?
Well, I think it's very valid. It's not just the oil barrel. I mean, it's everything. We're talking about going green, and the majority of all the rare earth metals and minerals are found in the Eurasian continent. The President Nadudu of I can never think of President Nadudu. He's an OPEC country. It'll come to me in a moment. He's calling for an OPEC style cartel of the rare earth metals. And look, it's one of these situations where, in terms of energy, we haven't thought this out very well at all. And I do agree with you. There is no other way but to bring a new system to the forefront. It must be, I believe it will be, a blockchain of some sort. XRP is as good as any, of course. But I also think gold will have to have a role in it, maybe a very small pegging. Look, the fact that the Bank of International Settlements reclassified gold as the world's only other tier one reserve asset is massive. I mean, you have to understand, why would they have done that after 70 years of it just being dollars and treasuries? The fact that the central banks have not only bought more over the last 18 months, really over the last 3 years, and at any time in history, but have also repatriated all of their gold from the New York Fed and the Bank of England is massive. The fact that the exchanges, whether it be the Shanghai Gold Exchange, the London Metals Exchange, or the COMEX, have been bled and continue to be bled dry by very sophisticated traders is very illuminating. It is very, very important. One of the keys, I think, to your point that I agree with is that this will be how it plays out. It's a question of perhaps maybe more concerning to you as to what ledger do they use, what vehicle do they use. But the Bank of International Settlements told us gold is tier one, and the International Monetary Fund, which is a Western-based entity, came out at the beginning of this year in the winter last year, said like January 2023, said gold, they're looking at gold differently. They wrote a report, said gold as an international reserve, comma, a barbarous relic no more, question mark. In other words, the IMF is saying, hey, does gold have a role in reserve status for a new system? And Kristalina Georgieva, the head of the IMF, came out just a few weeks ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, and said any new central bank digital currency that is not pegged to something would be fiat. So I agree with you. In order to make that transition, there will have to be something. But to your point, look, I think it goes both ways. I think the Federal Reserve would like the ability to enact monetary and fiscal policy. The government would like the ability to, if needed, to your point, curtail or cramp the privacy, the rights, the constitutional rights of the citizen. The Constitution is a piece of paper that seems to be used when convenient. The rest of the time they piss on it. And so in terms of, the ability to program a currency, to be able to allow permission to use it or to not use it if you are not if you're not towing the line. And if you look at some of the patents that Bill Gates has related to this new system, related to the enhanced ID 2020, the new driver's license that everyone's supposed to have that allows you to travel, this enhanced ID. Well, the patents that he has center around the commingling of your bank records, your medical records, and your ability to transact all coincided with that one ID. So yes, I think that is something that people should worry about, the potential of, could the government cross the line? And my feeling is, yeah, they probably would. But it doesn't change the fact that we have more or less crossed the Rubicon. We are at 130% debt to GDP. And in all of history, there has never been a country that crossed that threshold, 130% debt to GDP, without defaulting in one form or another, whether it be through hyperinflation or all-out default. And so we are very, very quickly getting to the point where the rest of the world is looking for alternatives in and of itself, just based upon our indebtedness and the fact that we are a country that is more or less run out of options. This is what happens when you hold interest rates artificially suppressed for a decade and put more money into the economy in 4 years than in the history of the United States before it. You create massive distortions. The bond market, as an example, over the last 3 years will go down as the worst bond market crash in history. And so when you look at these countries like Saudi Arabia, who have been selling their oil for dollars, which are being inflated away, and taking the proceeds of those dollars as part of the agreement struck in 73 and putting it into treasuries, they're getting killed on both ends. At the same time, we've signed an executive order saying we're going green. We've weaponized the dollar. We are on, if people can't see where we are in this baseball game, bottom of the ninth inning, perhaps as it pertains to this Keynesian experiment, this petrodollar privilege, and then you put it all together and look at it and say, well, you know what's even crazier is that the lead economic advisor to the Biden administration, Jared Bernstein, a man who has a degree in music and a master's degree in social work, he's the lead economic advisor to the White House, advocates for the loss, immediate loss, the privilege that we can no longer afford of being the world reserve standard. And you can look at what we are doing, and it just appears that we are crossing that bridge quickly. So is this shift to a new system going to be orderly or chaotic? And I think that if it goes the way of the dollar being forsaken as the sole settlement currency for oil, then I think it becomes very disorderly very quickly. And so, yes, I think it's important to get your ducks in a row, to plan, to prepare for what is coming. And I do think that your thesis is as valid as any. Certainly, you can see the adoption around the world, other countries with XRP. You can see the fact that it is beginning to be talked about more and more and more in terms of its legitimacy. This bogus lawsuit with the SEC disappearing. This is one of those deals where, in a world of unknowns, it certainly makes sense. But the one thing that I will tell you is that I believe the dollar's days of being the sole settlement currency for oil are coming to an end. How it all shakes out, I guess we'll have to debate. But I will tell you that I give credibility to yours as much as any thesis or theory that I've heard in the last 3 years. And I've done over 1,200 podcasts on this topic. So, kudos to you. I think you have a good grasp of it. But I think only time is going to tell how this plays out. But what we are witnessing right now could very, very well be the trigger point to some very, and I say this in terms of, the Chinese say, may you live in interesting times. It's a curse. These are going to be interesting times. And I think it's really time that people wake up and start getting ready for these interesting times, because I don't think they're going to be easy.
No, I agree with you. And thank you for the kind words. I'll tell you one of the things that really has come back to resonate very hard with me is April 20th, 2020, when oil went negative for the first time in its history. And when I look at that moment just a few years ago, and now I look at where we are with BRICS and all the countries joining to have 80% of the world's oil production, I think to myself, and this is not an endorsement of any administration, but I look to that moment now much differently than I did when it happened. I didn't understand what was going on. I was trying to make sense of it all. Today, I look at it and speculate on the notion that was that administration telling the oil-producing countries, watch what I do. I'm going to prove to you I don't need your dollar. You can go do your little BRICS thing. That's what that looks like in hindsight to me. And again, not an endorsement to an administration, just looking at what that was and understanding how fundamentally important oil is to the world. And we watched it go negative for the first time ever. That in this moment looks like a way of telling those countries, don't need it, got another plan, don't need the petrodollar agreement, go do whatever you're going to do. Now, in this current climate, we see the conflicts jumping off, Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Palestine. Will Iran be involved by proxy? They already are, right? So we know that too. How big, as you said earlier in this, does this get? I don't know. How delicate of a hand will the countries have together to get through a moment like this? I don't know. But another thing I think about is that if we're there's no if, we're moving, as you said, to a new age, a reset, people call it. And for God's sakes, I do not want it to be a Klaus Schwab reset, right? That is for sure. Knock on wood here. But as we move into this new digital age, I absolutely look at the period that we're in and where we're moving to this digital age. And I have to think, what kind of time do we have to get there? Things are happening so fast. The transition, look, Brian Brooks, the former head of the Office of Comptroller of Currency, said, We were 20 years ago at 73% dominance of the currency. Today, we're at 58%, and we better do something before we get to a 50% level in order to handle the transition and the spillover shocks that'll come from it. Or we're going to go over a cliff, he had basically said. What a comment from someone in that has served at that role in that position to understand where we truly are. So I feel like, and look, and then I go back and history says World War II, the transition to the dollar. Well, it wasn't just as simple as that, hey, we're using the dollar, right? The US dollar was striving for more than a decade before then to even be a part of that conversation by the time that moment had happened. We see now the 10 to 15 year time frame that the distributed ledger technology world is in for this new system to move to. It feels like we are in a very tight window for something big to take place, Andy.
Yeah, no question. And look, the Chinese and these countries think in terms of decades.
That's right.
We think in terms of weeks.
Yes.
And they're plotting. I mean, Russia and Sudan have just signed an agreement to build a joint naval base in order to establish Russian presence near the Suez Canal. I don't know how much of the world's oil comes through there. A good portion, I think over 20%. It's a choke point. And between the Straits of Hormuz and the Suez Canal, you got these countries that are certainly not aligned with the U.S. agenda that along as you say, the majority of the OPEC countries, 80% of the world's oil production controlled by these countries, not to mention the majority of all the rare earth metals controlled by these countries that are all uniting against a common theme. This is a deal where until they come back with a common settlement currency, the examples are growing by the day of these countries striking deals in their local currencies. You got the head of the president of South Africa, Ramaphosa, who just came out and said that the era of giving away our raw materials is over. And they want to ensure that the lion's share of their wealth stays within the continent of Africa. You have Malaysia, who just came out, they're exploring a new gold dinar. And even their president said, look, if we can get between 5 or 6% with Islamic countries, it would be a positive step as it reduces dependency on the dollar. We talked a lot about Brazil. Brazil is the second largest exporter of corn in the world. They struck a deal with China last year to sell their their corn to China for yuan, and any trading back and forth would be between a real and yuan, not dollars. Well, it just came to pass that the export sales this year for soybeans for U.S. farmers is down over 40%. Because the largest importer, which is China, has turned to Brazil for importing soybeans instead of the United States and being paid for it not in dollars as it once was, but in yuan. Little by little by little by little by little is the type of deal where de-dollarization happens. And, we just saw the first ever cross-border digital yuan oil transaction with the Shanghai Petroleum and Natural Gas Exchange. Well, they've done plenty in Shanghai. Now they're doing it. Now, they didn't tell us who bought it, but it was cross-border and they accepted digital yuan little by little by little by little, and bang, all at once. It's called logarithmic decay. It's falling off the falls of Niagara Falls. The pitch starts to go little by little, and bang, where are we in this journey? I don't know how close we are to that moment.
Exactly.
But I do think it's coming. And I do believe that this rallying cry against the hypocrisy and hegemony of the West is real. And you're seeing it by all of these countries agreeing to trade in local currencies. That was the deal that was struck when they left the meeting in Johannesburg in August. There were a lot of people who were disappointed that Jim Rickards' prediction of a gold-backed currency being released in August never happened. I wasn't. Quite to the contrary, I think they're not ready for it. There's 27 other countries that have signed up or expressed interest in signing up with BRICS formally, and another 22 that have informally expressed interest, including our ally to the south, Mexico. And you need a block large enough to create critical mass. In your world, in crypto, you always hear the term mass adoption. Well, the same thing is true with the reserve currency or a currency to challenge the dollar. You need enough adoption, enough of a swath of humanity to make it work. And the countries that have signed up, you got Argentina. They have the largest natural gas deposit in South America, and they control the Straits of Magellan. You got the big oil producers in the Middle East, the United Arab Emirates, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt over there controlling the Straits of Hormuz and the Suez Canal. You got Ethiopia, the fastest growing country in an economy rather in Africa. And then you have all of these things that are happening that are only exacerbating this move to safety in numbers. So I do believe we will cross that Rubicon. And I have felt for a very long time, if you take a look at what this country is doing, it just seems so backwards. It's unbelievable.
Yes.
The decisions that we are making, you could argue, are perpetuating this. Instead of clinging to the world reserve status, we are incentivizing and aiding and abetting. And maybe that's what they're trying to do, to reset the system, but to point to a villain, those bastards, those sons of bitches. How could they do this to us, OPEC and Putin and Xi Jinping? Look at what they did. We have a rallying cry now. I think the mathematics is unavoidable, but to point to a villain instead of the brain dead monetary policy of the Fed and the irresponsible management of the world reserve currency and the indebtedness of this country and the manner by which we rule the world. I'll give you one last example, and I think this will help people understand what I'm talking about. You look at Iraq. Iraq was invaded 20 years ago in 2003. They would tell you it was done illegally. We went there under the guise of weapons of mass destruction, didn't find any, destroyed your country. Sorry, we put in a new regime. Sorry. So, okay, we put in a new regime. Then tell me, why is it that all of their oil revenue has to be held in an account at the Federal Reserve in New York? They're not even allowed to seek alternate places to put their money from oil revenue. In 2022, Iraq earned $90 billion in oil revenue, and it's all sitting in the Federal Reserve, in the New York Federal Reserve. And they asked them last month, can we please have $1 billion of our $90 billion that we made last year? And they said, no. So they just made trading in dollars illegal if you own a company in Iraq. I mean, they'll be like, fuck you. If that's the case, you're not going to give us our money. Well, then we're going to start to move away. They just publicly said, we would like to join BRICS if we are invited. They just made trading in dollars illegal. If you own a business, you'll go to jail. And they'll take your business. And all physical dollar bills will be out of the country by January 1st, 2024. They are little by little moving away from a country that supposedly liberated them and installed a sovereign government. They can't even touch the money that they're making in oil revenue. 14 of their banks, about a third of their banks, are being sanctioned because they tried to trade with Iranian banks to get natural gas to cool their homes in the middle of 120-degree summer. Nope, sanction, take the money, you're off. So the point of it is the hypocrisy that the rest of the world looks at us and says, these guys are ridiculous. They come in, they destroy a country under guise of weapons of mass destruction. They topple the regime. They're still there 20 years later. They're confiscating all their oil revenues. They can't have their money, and they're supposedly there to liberate. The point of it is that I'm a patriot. I love this country, but the decisions that our politicians, our leaders are making are ridiculous. And the information that us Americans get by trying to be patriotic, to stand up for our government, it's becoming harder and harder to do. You can be a patriot and love everything this country stands for, and then you can look at the administration and say, what the fuck are we doing? And I apologize for my profanity, but it's one of these deals where it gets so aggravating already that our administration is leading us down a pathway of no return. We are going to cross that bridge. We're going to cross that Rubicon and watch what happens when we have to move to a new system. And I think the only way, Brad, that we get to that new system is for people to experience a lot of pain. And that pain would be the following: there's that moment where we've incentivized the world to no longer take dollars for oil. I mean, that's what we're doing. We're pushing them. We've signed an executive order. We're going green. We've told that to Saudi Arabia. We've weaponized the dollar. We're doing all of these things contrary to what a free society who enjoys the privilege of being the world reserve currency would do. And it happens. And when that happens and everything collapses, look at the banking system. It's hanging on by a thread, massively over leveraged and undercapitalized. And you see interest rates spike any higher than they are, you're talking massive bank collapses, one after another, after another, after another, as rates continue to go higher, as the only thing they have left to sell are treasuries that are underwater. And when that happens and people lose everything, stocks, bonds, real estate, 401k, pensions, have no fear. Have no fear. Lael Brainerd, the number 2 economic advisor to the US government, who is a modern monetary theorist, who helped develop the new central bank digital currency with MIT when she was at the Boston Fed, who helped run Point for FedNow, which just came out last month. FedNow being the Federal Reserve's form of Venmo and Zelle, which within 1 year will replace all checks. They'll be dead and gone. Have no fear. Sign on the dotted line. Take the central bank digital currency, and we will make you whole. And what I'm getting at is that I think there is too much reluctance, loss of trust and faith in the administration for people to blindly take the central bank digital currency, which at the beginning of this conversation, you intimated the loss of privacy and our constitutional rights by them being able to dictate what we can and can't spend money on and cut you off if you're not following the rules, or any of these, Orwellian type of 1984 things that seem to be happening. The only way I think you'll get people to massively adopt a new system is to lose everything and be reluctantly forced into taking it, begrudgingly. We'll make you whole. Sign on the dotted line. We're sorry that it's happened. They did it to us. And then you have this rallying cry against that portion of the world who is moving against the West. I think that's where we're going. The question becomes, where does XRP fit in all of this? Where does gold fit in all of this? I guess only time will tell. But I guess the common thread to me is freedom from the matrix. And but I do think we are heading down this road, and I wish I didn't feel that it was planned. I do. And because of that, I feel the inevitability grows by the day of this becoming something that becomes very real very quickly. So I wish my message was one of more optimism, but it's not. In fact, quite to the contrary, I think we continue to make the worst possible decisions as an administration that will only accelerate this ultimate moment where the petrodollar is no longer only denominated in US dollars. Maybe it isn't even part of a new system where they just move to a whole new settlement currency for oil. And then what happens? I guess only time will tell.
Well, it's so well said. And, to your point that you made about the United States and the world may need a villain, never let a good crisis go to waste. That's what I think of, right? And it's so fitting. And much like you, I'm a patriot as well. Before anything else, I'm a human being and a patriot of this country. I'll take it, flaws and all, right? And at the end of the day, what I'd like to see as a patriot is I'd like to see the manufacturing that's been pushed outside of this country brought back to the world, so we can really get strong inside our country again as we move to this new system. Because I think at the same time, you could begin to sever the Achilles heel on China and countries that really have that 100-year plan, and really start to cripple them a little bit by saying, you know what, we don't need you to make our goods anymore. We're bringing this back. We're bringing that back. And if we have to pay more for it going forward, we'll pay more for it, right? Because our jobs are right here, and we can serve our goods out and compete with the rest of the world in the quality of our goods and demand. I think those are two big steps that would really go a long way to slowing down this landslide of a nightmare. Like you said, I wish your message was better too, but I mean, you got to call it like you see it. And right now, this is what we're seeing, and things are a bit of a shit show, and we got to be prepared. And look, that's That's one of the reasons that we have you come on here, Andy. It's your insights and the fact that you do offer gold with Miles Franklin. And I am currently, and it's not financial advice to anybody, but I'm currently trying to get 15 to 20% of my portfolio hedged with gold. That's what I'm trying to do. And I'm trying to do that as quickly and responsibly as possible. And if other people want to do it, they can do it too. Final thought this thing for us, Andy.
Final thought. I just think that this is accelerating. It's getting very, very real. I think gold and silver to me are wealth. Yeah. They're not an investment. I think that if you are not a contrarian right now, you will end up being a victim. I really do believe that. Yeah. I think these things are coming, and it's a foregone conclusion. I think we're going to see much higher rates, and I think we're going to see big problems with the banking system. And this will be where a good portion of the problems spring from. The question is, do we see the catalyst offshore first? If I had to guess, we'll see a bank failure here this year, excuse me, that will be bailed in. And this is one of the topics that I talk a lot about, is that I bet you there's a good portion of the people watching this show. I mean, it astonishes me how few people understand what a bail-in is, that it was written into law in 2009 in the Dodd-Frank legislation. This is why there was so much outrage when Silicon and Signature banks were bailed out. They're supposed to be bailed in. We are unsecured general creditors of the bank. And watch what happens when the next bank fails and it is bailed in. And you see this mad rush to people yank their money out of the banks. As that happens, the only thing that these banks have in order to meet those redemptions would be bonds that have gotten crushed. They have very little in the way of reserves. A well-liquefied bank has less than 5% reserves on hand. Most of these banks have next to nothing. So when you go and say, give me back my money, most of them have no choice but to sell treasuries that are underwater. This will start to feed on itself. It is a doom loop. I think it's very, very important to look at gold and silver, not as an investment, but as wealth that has outlived everything the world's ever thrown at it. From 2 world wars, we might be at the foot of the third. German hyperinflation, we might be at the foot of American hyperinflation. The Great Depression, we could be coming there too. I mean, yeah. These are times that are unprecedented. We have 130 trillion in debt, and 155 trillion in debt, which is 130 in unfunded liabilities, 120 in unfunded liabilities, $33 trillion debt. We have 5 trillion in assets. The biggest asset being student debt, representing 40% of our asset base. We're broke, we're insolvent. And I think that this is something they realize that they have 3 options. Option 1, default. And every country that has ever crossed that 130 debt to GDP level has, in one way or another. Option 2, inflate. And outright hyperinflation is a form of default. And number 3 is find a villain. And I think that's the route we're taking. And if I'm right, even a little bit right, you need to protect yourself. You need to get out of any variable rate debt, get some gold and silver, start to prepare as if a hurricane was coming. Yeah. And do some due diligence, open your eyes to what's coming, because I think it's real. I really do.
Andy, I know you do, and I do too. And I want to thank you for your time here today. It means a lot to all of us. The audience just loves your insights. I do too. And I really do appreciate you being here. It is, these words are so, so very important. Andy Schectman, Miles Franklin, don't go anywhere. Thank you for being here.
And I'm not crying about all this. I got some wicked allergies today.
Yeah, well, I apologize.
Do too. I know it's enough to make you want to cry, but one of these deals where the allergies are getting the better of me. So it just coincides with something that isn't really the best topic to talk about. But hey, I'd rather be aware and alert and know what's coming and be able to protect myself than be blindsided by something that you can't see coming.
Well said, Andy Schectman, Miles Franklin. Make sure you hit the link underneath the video. Dig perspectives in the subject box to get the best prices on gold and silver right now today. Thank you, Andy.